Okay, so Holy Paladin. So I decided after running Mythics on my Evoker and playing with um, quite a few Paladins in different groups that I would give Paladin another try. It's one of those classes I kind of have a love-hate relationship with. I like them in concept. In practice, I've never really found a spec or a build that I actually liked playing, at least up until now. So, probably the most successful spec I've actually played was Retribution when I was leveling doing PvP. I actually had quite a bit of fun playing as Retribution. Um, Other than that, I've played all three specs, um, focusing mostly on Holy, because Holy's probably mostly what I played. Holy or Protection is kind of a toss up. So I have a couple thoughts, having leveled to level 70, as far as the talents are concerned. One, I feel like of all the classes I played, the both the Paladin talents and the Holy talents are very probably my least favorite. Just because there's no way to make any kind of just a pure kind of healing build. While I understand the what Paladins are supposed to be, um, they're supposed to be kind of holy fighters and holy healers. I get that. Everything seems to want to do damage and healing. Now, if you play as one of the other specs and you're used to kind of um, how the mechanics and rotation and everything for Paladin works as far as the damage side, that may not be as much of an issue. Um, I just had to take a lot of things that I didn't necessarily want to. There were actually very few talents that were specifically helpful, it seemed like, to healing. So, the other thing is, I wanted to do this without taking two abilities, Avenging Wrath and Aura Mastery. Avenging Wrath, I just don't care for. It's been baseline in the past quite a bit, and I just don't use it that much for what it does. It's not a bad ability. I just don't care for it. I just don't find myself using it. Didn't feel like I needed it. Just kind of wanted to skip it. Um, and then Aura Mastery. So this is kind of a sub mechanic that Paladins have, where you end up giving yourself a buff which affects whatever group you are in. So if I was to flip through, you'll see it's changing what it's supposed to be doing. So, um, so the idea is you get a small buff that is constant on you and the group, and then using this will increase it to whatever percent for a short duration of time. It just needs fleshed out more. Um, for an ability with a 3 minute cooldown, it just needs some tweaking, I feel like, and it would be pretty good. The only one that's really relevant to healing is the damage reduction. As you see, it will give an increase of 15. Um, you already get 3, so you're only up to like 17%, which is um, significant, not enough in practice when I've used it in the past. It's not enough to, like in an emergency situation, to really make much of a difference. Hence, what I mean by it needs to be fleshed out. It needs to be doing something more for having a 3 minute cooldown. I feel like that's a bit excessive for no more than it does. So, um, otherwise, I have made a build that is fairly functional, I would say. Um, I've done dungeons. I was doing classic dungeons up until level 60, and then it makes you do Dragonflight dungeons. So I was doing Dragonflight dungeons, and then when I got to 60, like 60 or 70, when I got to like 68 or so, I started doing PvP. So from there until 70, I've been doing PvP. So I've kind of ran everything through its paces. So what I'm going to do, since the talents are very kind of personal preference, I'm going to focus mainly on the abilities and then what talent I took for those abilities. I feel like that would be the best way to explain everything. So, um, Holy Paladins are mostly single target um, healers and direct healing. There is no overtime or anything like that. You use an ability, it does something, that's it. So that being said, there's some things I took that kind of give some AoE, short-term AoE kind of, not burst healing per se, but you can end up with a little bit of AoE. So, um, first is Holy Shock, which is going to be the one you're going to use the most. So this is kind of like Penance for Discipline Priest. It does damage or healing depending on what target you use it on. If you use it on an enemy, it'll do damage. If you use it on an ally, it'll heal. Um, this is going to be the one you're going to use the most. Holy Paladins also have Holy Power, which has 5 charges. And then you can spend those charges on a couple of different abilities. So Holy Shock is an ability that will grant you a Holy Power. Um, so if we look at the talents there, so that is the first talent you get in the Holy talent tree. And then Glimmer of Light. So this is something that's newer. I don't remember this. It's been a while since I've done anything with Paladin. But I don't remember this the last time I did anything with Paladin, so this is a fairly newer ability. Works really well. I like this because it doesn't take anything away from the single target aspect. However, it does give you a little bit of AoE healing. It kind of plays off of the Beacon of Light kind of concept and the um, kind of echo kind of concept that invokers have. So Holy Shock leaves a glimmer of light on the target for 30 seconds. When you Holy Shock, targets with Glimmer of Light are damaged or healed, split evenly among them. Glimmer of Light's total healing and damage is increased by 6% for each target affected. You may have up to 8 targets. You may have Glimmer of Light on up to 8 targets. When Glimmer of Light is dispelled, its effect is activated at 100% value. So, basically, if you know what Beacon of Light does, which normally is on your tank. So if you heal somebody else in the group, part of that healing will go to the tank. So this does the same thing, just you have to have Glimmer of Light on the target. And I did take... where is it here? I did take... There we go. A talent to allow Glimmer of Light to affect up to 5 additional targets. So 8 is probably going to be more than plenty for what it does and the value, how it splits everything evenly and everything. You're probably not going to want to go much beyond 8. And I don't think I ever really have 8. I think it's more closer to about 5, give or take, 5 or below. So Not terrible. This actually makes um, healing a um, lot more well-rounded. So I'm really happy with that. I didn't take this originally. I had taken Glimmer of Light's healing and damage is increased by 25%, but it can only affect one target at a time. So I didn't quite fully understand what it did, and then I went through at one point and just reset the holy talents. Because I've mostly picked everything kind of one level at a time. When I was doing classic dungeons, I was getting at 2 levels, so I was getting a talent point for each side, which was kind of nice because I was able just to kind of look at the baseline abilities in the Paladin talent, and then the more spec specific in the holy talents. So I just kind of reset the holy talents just to kind of go over everything again to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And that was one of the talents that I changed, and it was definitely a change for the better. Because once I changed it and then actually used it and saw what it was doing, then everything started to make more um, sense. So Holy Shock has 2 charges. You're probably going to want that because it's going to be on cooldown all the time. A lot of these that I'm just kind of skipping over were ones I mostly took just to use the talent point. Um, Tar's Deliverance was the Legion artifact ability for Holy, if I remember correctly. Um, yeah, so not yeah, so not terrible. Not like I said, not too many things that directly um, affected like just healing. Um, a lot of the talents I noticed needed to use you needed to use some sort of damaging ability as well to get the full effect. Um, so, and I only really did that with one ability because it was the only kind of at range ability I had. Um, so then moving on to Flash Heal, which normally, or Flash of Light, excuse me. Flash Heal is a priest ability. Um, so Flash of Light normally is your big, expensive single target heal. However, with the way I have it set up, it kind of works like a filler ability in a way. So I kind of end up running between this mini rotation of Holy Shock, Flash of Light, and Word of Glory. And then just kind of use everything else just kind of when need be. Um, Depending on um, Holy Shock's charges, whether it's on cooldown or not, what procs I have for Flash of Light, Holy Power, things like that. So these three kind of all work together without working together, if that makes sense. So um, if we look here, let me see. I know casting Flash of Light or Holy Light, which is the cheaper, slower, large single target heal, grants 1 holy power. So this was important because starting out, I was really short um, on abilities that granted holy power. And most of your abilities require 3. You can have a maximum of 5. So they're quite expensive. They're also quite good, to be fair, for what they do. The abilities that consume holy power. It was just kind of a challenge to generate enough to kind of be able to use something at least partially when need be. So this has helped dramatically. So now, like I said, I'm able to kind of do everything because either something's going to proc or something generates holy power or something like that. So everything does kind of the few that I was able to take for either holy power or infusion of light were usually really good. Um, And Infusion of Light is... Where is it here? There we go. So your critical holy shocks empower your next spell to cast. So flash heals mana cost is reduced by 100%, which is important because, as I said, it's the expensive one. It has a short cast time, and it is a large single target heal. So if you can get no mana cost, it's basically just free healing, um, literally and figuratively. So, and you do have symbols that pop up on the screen, so it's really easy to know when you have the proc to use it. Holy Light generates 2 holy power, which I don't use. Judgment, greater judgment prevents an additional 150% damage dealt by the target. So, get into judgment here later. Um, so, while empowered by Infusion of Light, Flash Heal heals for an additional 20%. Holy Light or Judgment refunds 5% of your maximum mana. That is so low it doesn't really seem to matter. It's mainly the Fusion of Light and Flash of Light that you're going to want to focus on with that passive. And I think that's it, really. I think that was just, I think everything else was just kind of, as I said, what I took just to use the talent point. Fusion of Light has 1 additional charge. Increases greater judgment effect by an additional 50%. Reduces the cost of Flash of Light by an additional 30%. And causes every 3 casts of Holy Light to generate an additional holy power. So, as I said, you do have options. I can see different ways you could set this up, depending on how familiar you were with or are with Paladin. So, and then next is Word of Glory, which is the single target ability that consumes holy power. Don't think I took anything for that. I think it's pretty much just as is. There is one passive that kind of has a cool interaction with it. So I um, decided to kind of skip taking Blessing of Protection. So again, another kind of sub mechanic that Paladins have. Not sure how much the other 2 specs have it. Is kind of blessings or hands. So like you have Blessing of Sacrifice, Blessing of Protection, Blessing of Freedom. I thought there was one more. Maybe not. Maybe that's all there is now. So I skipped Blessing of Protection mainly because it has a Forbidden debuff, which is what Divine Shield has, and Lay on Hands has, and things like that. So it just gets kind of clunky to try to use it. Even though you might probably want to save it to use it on an ally rather than yourself, um, still, you could use Lay on Hands and just completely refill their health. So that's probably better. So it just kind of seemed a bit irrelevant for kind of what I was trying to go for. I did keep Blessing of Sacrifice just because I couldn't swap it out. I kind of had to pick in order to keep going down the talent tree. Kind of had to pick. So I kept Blessing of Sacrifice because I kind of like its effect. It just redirects damage to you. So if you're using Beacon of Light, this can help with that because you're healing yourself, taking damage away from the tank, healing yourself, which in return will transfer part of that healing back to the tank. So it does have a benefit, and it's kind of a unique ability. So I was fine keeping that. I don't use it that often. It's just kind of there for those occasional situations where it comes in handy. However, that being said, when you do use it, it does have a passive that works with it that will increase either the damage of Judgment or the healing of Word of Glory. So all the damage, this effect's bonus damage cannot exceed 30%. Healing cannot exceed 100% of your maximum health. So, and 50% of the total damage it diverted is added to your next judgment as bonus damage or your next word of glory as bonus healing. So, and I typically actually use it with judgment, probably more. Um, there's quite a few talents that kind of stack with judgment. Um, so that I kind of like. It gives you, I think, 10 seconds to use one ability or the other. Um, just kind of a neat interaction. I kind of like that. Um, yeah, and then Word of Glory grants 20% more bonus armor for 4.5 seconds. So, as I said, not a whole lot of talents that actually, just focused on healing. So, and then I had a choice to make. So, with the um, old talents with the rose, um, there were three abilities that paladins got. I want to say around warlords is when I remember them first being introduced, and they all basically did the same thing in three slightly different ways. So you had these two abilities. You had Light's Hammer, which is a at location ability, and then you had Holy Prism, which will do different things depending on who's targeted. If you target a ally, it will do damage to enemies around them. If you target an enemy, it will do healing to allies around the target. And then you had Execution Sentence, which became a protection only ability, I want to say, if I remember correctly. And it would put a hammer on a target that would do both. It would slowly um, kind of wind down and would do damage to enemies and healing to allies, as I recall. And that was usually the one people took because that was usually the better of the three. In the past, I have taken both of these. As I said, there's not really a lot of AoE for Holy Paladins, if any at all. Um, so I would just kind of stack the two. Because Light's Hammer can be used at a target location, so it was good just to throw that down and have a bit of constant, even though it did a small amount of healing, just constant healing. So kind of used it like a healing stream totem in a way, just kind of kept it down, kept it on cooldown just so there was a constant bit of healing going. And then Holy Prism was kind of a bit more of the situational one you would use when like one or two people really were starting to take damage. Had to pick, obviously, so went with Holy Prism, which actually does pretty large portion of my healing. Um, it's good in about every situation, whether you're doing dungeons or PvP, what have you. It's going to. It has a fairly large range. Um, it says 30 yards. I question if that how accurate that is because it feels like it does a pretty wide range. You can I know several times like Warsong Gulch, um, being in the mid, using it on a target. Like the targets that it healed were pretty far away considering for a healing ability, and definitely larger than like a healing rain or anything like that. Um, and it did quite a bit of healing. So it scales really well. It's always been a pretty good ability since I took it. I forget what level exactly, but I've had it for a while now. Just an all around good ability. So I would definitely say this was an ability I'd say I'd recommend getting. Unless for some reason you wanted to take Light's Hammer. I could see in raiding with certain mechanics, maybe this would be more beneficial since you can put it at a target location. You may not want to have an ability that is going to damage um, a target if you're trying to heal or vice versa. But generally, if you were trying to figure it out, I'd definitely say Holy Prism was probably the better of the two. And then Light of Dawn is the only actual Paladin ability that does AoE healing. And I don't remember if I remember the first time I leveled a Paladin, I did not have this. And I don't remember if it wasn't in the game or if it was like the level 85 talent. I want to say it was the level 85 talent because it was forever before I got this. And then I was kind of disappointed when I did because it used Holy Power, which was a whole kind of separate thing I was getting used to at the time. And it makes Paladin, if I'm not mistaken, the only class that has to use a separate resource to do AoE healing. Because I know almost every class has at least one ability that just uses mana. Um, so, let me see here if I took any talents for that. Again, fairly large range, um, which it tells you it's within five injured allies within 40 yards. So it really scaled well. It starts out kind of just doing small healing, which really isn't all that useful. Once you get higher up, level 70, um, I got some better gear. Um, didn't have a full set of Forbidden Reach gear for some reason, but I had a few pieces to replace um, what kind of heirloom gear I had left, or just some of the lower pieces of gear. So once you got a little bit of gear and stuff, it actually doesn't do bad. It's not the the best AoE heal in the game, obviously, but it is something. So because it's the only AoE you have, it kind of stands out a little bit more. Um, this is what I notice I use my Holy Power on probably the most. Like I said, depending on what Holy Shock and Flash of Light are at with the charges and the proc. Um, so it's one of the first abilities you're going to get with your holy talents. And then let me see here. So it increases healing of your word of glory. Um, increases the range of Light of Dawn to 40 yards. So that I would say definitely take. Because it does work in kind of a cone. Um, it doesn't heal. Well, it says unleash a wave, which is not one of those abilities that the wording is kind of can be interpreted different ways. It does mostly do a cone. Um, I don't want to say it won't heal players like to the side of you or behind you, but it mostly works in a cone. That's who's mostly going to get the healing. So you're going to want to make sure you're um, kind of angled as in a way where most of the players are in front of you. That being said, again, in PvP, you can use this and it will go out pretty pretty long way. So I've been pleasantly surprised with that. It it changed doesn't scale all that well, which may have had to do with my gear. Because as I said, once I got to level 70 and got some better gear, I really noticed it started doing more. So I kind of started using it more. Um, and then I think that was it. That was like the main one I took for that. Yeah. So then you may have noticed that I don't have Beacon of Light because I took Beacon of Virtue. Started out with Beacon of Light. And this was one again that I changed when I went through and was swapping out, just kind of double checking, swapping out a few of the holy talents. Um, wasn't sure about this, just kind of took it to play around. Alternatively, Beacon of Faith puts Beacon of Light on a second target. Um, I would say Beacon of Virtue is better, even though it isn't, it's more of a short duration ability. Um, because of what you can do with it. This kind of is what helps make um, Holy Paladin, or is what has helped make me be able to kind of AoE heal a little bit more. So this will temporarily put a Beacon of Light on um, so 4 injured allies. So basically about everyone in a group, if you're in a dungeon group, for the most part. Because if it's you plus 4 others, um, the DPS and the tank basically would get it. Um, I think depending on who's, um, yeah, I don't think it affects you. I was trying to think. I'm pretty sure it affects the other people in your group. I don't think it works like on um, like on radius, like who's closest. Um, so I have found out you can combo this with just about anything, and it works absolutely fantastic. I've used it with Light of Dawn. I've used it with Holy Prism. Bearing in mind, Beacon of Light will um, transfers any healing done to any other ally in your group. So if everyone has um, basically a Beacon of Light on top of Glimmer of Light, so Glimmer of Light is evening out the healing. Um, Beacon of Virtue is transferring healing around. So it tends to be a lot. So you can heal a whole group. Um, that's about maybe halfway down. Each player's about between full health and about halfway, somewhere in there. Um, you can heal almost the entire group in PvP or in a dungeon. So works absolutely fantastic. Um, and then I already kind of went over Blessing of Sacrifice. So then Divine Toll, um, which is kind of what I've been using Beacon of Virtue with, um, because it instantly casts Holy Shock on up to 5 targets within 30 yards. So by itself, it's not bad. It's not great. It's not bad. I've had targets for some reason that have um, I thought were more than within 30 yards, and it just didn't seem to do anything. There seems to be a lot of hit and miss with this for some reason, and I don't know if it's something I'm doing or if it's just kind of situational, like where they are. Um, it's unfortunate because it's basically wasted healing. Holy Shock doesn't do overtime healing, it's instant healing. So, on the bright side, it only has a 45-second cooldown. Beacon of Virtue only has a 15-second cooldown. So, you can use these often. Now, I made the mistake in playing around that you can wipe yourself out of mana. So you do kind of have to pace yourself. Um, they do come with some pretty heavy mana costs, but you can use this with um, kind of combo it with anything. So that has been super helpful. Super helpful and fun because you're constantly doing something. I would say that's probably the upside that I would say if somebody wanted to know kind of why they might want to play Paladin is you are constantly doing something. You constantly have to be thinking about what you're doing, targeting one player or the other. You're not actually switching targets all that often to heal, because it's usually going to be the focus of whatever the attack is. It's usually going to be on one or two players, so you can kind of focus on them and then just kind of run through everything else. And Holy Prism will heal, Light of Dawn will heal, of course, Beacon of Virtue. Um, I've used this with Holy Shock. I think I've used it with just about everything. Um, Works super well. Um, was really glad I took this. Kind of felt foolish that I kind of looked over it. Because I've looked at these in the past, and like a lot of people liked Beacon of Faith at different times, and then some people took Beacon of Virtue. Like there wasn't really one specific thing to take. Some abilities are super obvious and everybody takes them, and you know, depending on what they do, there may or may not be a reason why. It just seems to be some things the player base gravitates towards. Other things have a clear purpose for whatever their effect is. So, um, Beacon of Virtue works perfectly fine. Divine Toll, and then Divine Toll's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. So, um, I don't have um, I don't have a big kind of raid cooldown, which kind of surprised me. Um, so that has been an issue. Few and far between, but here and there. It would have been nice to have like a larger cooldown. That's kind of what I thought Divine Toll would be. Since I was using Holy Shock, I thought, oh, well, being able to use 5, that basically just in a dungeon group, that's everyone. Um, so, that being said, do you really need a big raid cooldown? Yes, no. Um, Kind of depends, again, kind of how familiar you are with Paladin, and I think, too, kind of who else is in your group. Um, I do fine in most dungeons. I don't really notice a difference in healing between Paladin and other um, classes. I've played, of course, Invoker, um, Priest. I've played Holy and Discipline quite a bit during Dragonflight. Um, Druid. I don't notice much difference there. In PvP, it kind of really depends on who else is in your group, which I've found that to be true often in previous expansions and patches and things, when I've been healing on other classes. Um, there is a difference when, like, if you've been doing PvP, kind of, a couple players leave, you kind of just keep refilling the group and keep going. There is a difference between the games where you have a paladin and the games you don't. And that is true more often than not in PvP. Um, for a variety of reasons. They have Divine Shield. Um, they can be extremely good if you know what you're doing, that's kind of the whole key to it, is knowing what you're doing. And it's been, like I said, hadn't really found like a build that I kind of gelled with that was actually kind of fun to play. I just always kind of felt like I was missing something. It was just different enough that trying to catch on to everything was just um, kind of discouraging. So I always just kind of messed around and then just kind of went back to something else or just started doing something else. Um, so then the one damage ability that I did kind of build some things around was Judgment. Um, and I don't use it all that often. I got used to using um, what was it? Fire Breath as Invoker, and then Phalanx Stomp when I was leveling my monk, and things like AoE damage kind of stuff. And while Judgment is good, it's just a single target. It's not an AoE. So Greater Judgment deems the target unworthy, preventing the next damage dealt to the target. So not bad. Judgment damage is increased by 10%. Of course, we went over Blessing of Sacrifice and all that. Um, there was, where is it? One ability that I was disappointed. There we go. So Judgment has a 30% chance to cast Consecration at the target's location. I was really disappointed in this because it's a lot lower than 30%. There are single percentage abilities that proc more often than this does. Anytime I'm kind of creating a rule of thumb that anytime there's an ability with a percentage chance, you just kind of have to take it if you think it's worthwhile and play around with it and see, because it does not, it is far less than 30%. I can go through a whole dungeon run and never see this proc once. And I can use Judgment once per pull. You know, trash, boss, all that. And this will never do anything. And then I'll be in a group doing something and it'll just randomly happen. So I was disappointed because there was another ability. There we go. Consecration heals you and 5 allies within it for a very small amount. So this potentially could have been really good if they increased the percentage. I feel like this would be better, because you have to you do have to use an ability, and then there's a percentage chance. So it's not a guaranteed thing, even if you were to increase the percentage to 40, 50%. Um, so I was kind of disappointed because I kept trying to get this to do more. I kept seeing, as I kept working down both trees, I kept seeing Judgment come up, and I thought, okay, there's got to be a way that these like stack and work together, and just could not make it work. So I just kind of gave up on it. The damage reduction is nice. The damage in general is nice. It's nice just to have something to an ability to do damage to kind of work into your rotation, just kind of as a filler. Um, yeah, I think, and then other than that, I think that was pretty much it for, yeah. I think those couple were about it, unfortunately. So yeah, and I think that's, yeah. So as I said, if you use Beacon of Virtue, and I was using Divine Toll as well, like I just wiped out my mana. Um, just in experimenting and playing around, just seeing kind of how everything worked. I was kind of getting back into the swing of PvP. Um, and usually, like a couple levels before level 70, you start to get into more serious games that are not as silly as some might be when you're leveling. Um, so when I ran out of my mana, um, you do not generate mana quickly. Of course, being in combat, it's hard to get out of combat in PvP. You're almost better just letting yourself die, so you'll revive with full mana. Um, so I took Daybreak, which I had looked at and kind of said, well, you know, I wasn't sure. I was kind of on the fence about it. Um, it absorb your active Glimmer of Light, triggering their effects at 200% value and granting 3,000 mana per Glimmer of Light consumed. So it seemed good. Um, Again, when you see things with percentages, effects, triggering their effects at 200% value, then it said it absorbs, so it was kind of, it's one of those abilities that's kind of worded in a way that doesn't completely make sense, I feel like. Because to me, if you're absorbing an ability, you're taking the ability off the player, so I don't know how it's triggering their effects at 200%. And then grants 3,000 mana per Glimmer of Light consumed. So I was thinking, okay, so I took this talent, which can affect up to 5 additional targets. It says it affects up to 8. In a PvP group, you have 10 to 15 in most of them, unless you do like the epic ones. There's like 25. So I thought, oh, this should be really good. I don't need to use it all the time, just, in those situations where I notice it's getting lower, which is usually like mid towards the end of the match. So I thought, well, that's fine. I have used this a few times. Um, I'm still, I would say, in the stages of kind of playing around with this. I have used it a few times though, and it barely does anything. Um, I know I consumed like 2, 3 Glimmer of Lights, and it just my mana like barely budged. Um, so I'm not entirely sure. There's not when you actually type in mana, other than abilities that um say they I know there was one like that reduce the mana cost. Um, Lay on hands, which I don't really use that often. Um, and restores 5% of your mana. The healing of your next holy light or flash heal is increased by 60%. Its cast time is reduced by 30%. Its mana cost is reduced by 50%. Call upon the light to empower your spells, causing your next 2 holy lights to heal 80% more. Cost 50% less mana and be instant cast. So, yeah, a little bit disappointing. I've noticed that with some of the different healing classes. Like some do perfectly fine with mana. Others you can tend to run out. Like if you're constantly healing, um, things start to become a problem, which is a bit weird because that has not been the case in the past. I remember like back in the day needing spirit to affect, which would grant you would increase your mana regeneration. I know it did out of combat. I think it did in combat. I want to say one of them was a fixed amount, and then the other one you could just keep stacking spirit. And then once they took spirit away and they leveled everyone's mana pool out, things got better, and then they started doing the stats squish, which kind of is kind of good and bad, depending on what expansion we're in when they do it. Um, So yeah. So and then just to go over the PvP talents. So every 5 seconds, the healing done by your next Light of Dawn is increased 20%, stacks up 5 times. Your Blessing of Sacrifice now transfers 100% of all damage to you into damage over time effect, but lasts 6 seconds and no longer cancels when you are below 20% health. And Denounce, and I really like this. I had taken. What did I take? I had taken. I do not remember. I had taken something else. What was it? Was it Judgment? Might have been Judgment. Judgment of the Pure. Yeah. Anyway, um, so I played, um, went into PvP, played a game, didn't really care for it. Was kind of torn between the two. Tried Denounce, which turns your Shield of Righteous into a spell. Um, does cost holy power, which is kind of the downside. However, if I can actually cast this, more often than not, the target ends up dying. Um, cast down the enemy with a bolt of holy light, causing holy damage and preventing the target from casting critical effects for the next 8 seconds. So it's kind of like using mind games or something. Um, if somebody else is attacking, usually a melee, if they're attacking a target and I'm able to use this, more often than not they end up dying. So um, it's a really nice ability to have. Even though it does cost holy power, I don't typically do a lot of damage. I typically just use Judgment and Denounce kind of skirmishes just here and there, just doing a little bit of damage. I'm mostly focusing on healing. Um, but when you are able to use it, it does come in handy. It's one of those abilities that you may not use that often, but when you do, it's usually worth it. So, yeah. So there you go. So hopefully I explained all that in a way that made sense. Yeah. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope that was helpful for you. And thank you for watching.